The Metal Gear series began on MSX2 computers, which were only released in Japan, inventing the stealth genre and detailed storytelling outside of RPGs with a twist always around the corner. But it wasn't until Solid Snake crept to the PlayStation with Metal Gear Solid in 1998 was Hideo Kojima finally recognized worldwide as an exceptional talent in the gaming industry. After MGS sold 6 million copies worldwide, development for a sequel began in 1999. The team grew from 15 to 70, and the first thing Kojima wanted to do with the PlayStation 2 hardware was expand on the cinematic style. The original plot was set in the Middle East with Liquid Snake returning as the main antagonist, but after tensions increased in real life, the idea was scrapped for a setting lost at sea. Kojima created two similar scenarios where one would be set on an aircraft carrier, a closed moving space you couldn't escape from, and the other immobile. After the team decided that the aircraft carrier scenario later becoming a tanker would be too short, they just went with both ideas instead. When it was unveiled at E3 in 2000, as you'd expect, everyone went crazy over Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, which was released for the PlayStation 2 on November 2001. Two years after the events of the Shadow Moses incident, another Metal Gear is being developed by the US Marine Corps and is being transported through New York.
And now every state, group, and .com has its own version of Metal Gear.
Not exactly a classified weapon for today's nuclear powers.
After Solid Snake and Otacon receive intelligence on the prototype, Snake enters the ship in the most subtle and coolest way imaginable, sneaks inside to collect evidence to verify Metal Gear's existence, and plans to expose it to the public, while avoiding the presence of US Marines who have no idea that a Russian mercenary group invaded the ship and plan to steal the prototype from themselves, or as Revolver Ocelot would say,
"Steal? No, I'm taking it back."
However, the events lead the ship to sink along with Solid Snake. 2 years later, Big Shell, a decontamination facility built to clean up the giant oil spill caused by the sunken tanker, is seized by terrorists known as the Sons of Liberty, led by Solid Snake. Ah yes, one of the most controversial moments in the series when you realize that Snake isn't the main protagonist, instead it's Raiden, allying with Iroquois Pliskin.
I don't smoke.
Keep it anyway. May come in handy.
Raiden is sent by Campbell to save the president and hostages on board, disable all explosives, and because this game is called Metal Gear, stop that as well, while spending most of the time unnoticed. Since this is a Kojima production with its many twists and turns, that's as far as I'll go. Kojima wanted to give Solid Snake more depth, and the best way to do that was to make a brand new character polar opposite from Snake from personality to appearance.
What are you... What the...
You're a man?
Metal Gear Solid 2 was released in North America a fortnight earlier than Japan, and the Raiden twist was kept secret in trailers, promotional material, and game covers only showing Solid Snake. A similar trick Nintendo R&D1 utilized with Metroid on the NES, referring Samus Aran as a he in game manuals only to find she's actually a woman. The swerve was also inspired by the twist in Terminator 2 with the T-800 being the hero this time. But you see with that, the T-800 is still the star, the main character. Whereas in Metal Gear Solid 2, Snake is now in a supporting role. It's a step back, especially if this new protagonist is a constant moaner. I mean, that's honestly the only thing I don't like about him, but it gets annoying very quickly.
She's never been a part of a field mission. This is insane.
It's like being in a nightmare you can't wake up from. Priority my butt. They're all in danger.
Literally the most popular word he says is,
What? What?
Don't get me wrong, when you progress through the game, Raiden is actually a highly developed character, but why couldn't you just continue as Solid Snake? He's at the decontamination facility, why not just play as him?
You never asked.
Oh yeah, and Iroquois Pliskin? I mean, I'm cool with the shout out to Escape from New York, but when you realize that Iroquois is a Francofied version of the Algonquin word for rattlesnake, Rattlesnake Pliskin, and that it's set 30 kilometers offshore from New York City, I'm surprised John Carpenter didn't file a lawsuit against Konami for this, but apparently he decided not to because he thought Kojima was a quote, nice guy. He probably would have realized his love of movies too. Anyway, about Raiden. We all know Kojima has that mentality of my game, my way. But this was the first time that mentality conflicted with the fans. Especially when you consider that the whole game was promoted with Solid Snake front and center. And that's what the fans wanted and got for a couple of hours. Why screw with it? But otherwise, Metal Gear Solid 2 once again has that perfect blend of returning and new characters including Olga, Vamp, and Fortune.
Is there anyone here that can give me happiness?
It looks even more cinematic with its thrilling angles, believable acting, and facial expressions, combined with themes of conspiracy, social engineering, and war, already setting another standard for storytelling in video games. You can tell that after the PS1 predecessor, Kojima and his team were only getting started. Even though Metal Gear Solid 2 came out a year after the launch of the PlayStation 2, today it almost looks like it belongs in the 7th generation. I watched the making of MGS2 in the special edition. The lengths they went into creating the highest level of realism is overwhelming. This was also the first in the series to introduce motion captured performances and was aided by a military instructor to train game designers the appropriate movements of a soldier. There were ideas to make the graphics cel shaded or based off the artwork used in the promotional material, but the design team chose the realistic approach, and thank God they did. However, when I said Kojima got a bit carried away with the subtle foreshadowing in my Metal Gear Solid review, here he got way too carried away. There are so many backstories and twists, it's like trying to put together a 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle with only half of the image as a clue. It's not like I can tell you exactly where my mind collapsed because that would spoil it. I was going to say the same thing about Metal Gear Solid, but the final couple of hours eventually came full circle. But in Sons of Liberty, that isn't the case. Basically, everything about the story, dialogue, characters, themes, and atmosphere in Metal Gear Solid 2 is fantastic. But by the time I got to the final boss, it got confusing to the point of disinterest. I was lost in the middle of an unknown city. I was able to beat it, but I spent a long time reading the plot and going back to the footage to see what I missed. Whether Kojima raised more unanswered questions deliberately, or there's just so much going on I can't keep up. One thing I know for sure, it's impossible to understand on the first playthrough. If you ever play Metal Gear Solid 2 for the first time, make sure you're ready to play the rest of the series as well.
Freeze!
The big shell is made up of hexagonal structures with bridges connecting each other and a certain number of enemies to sneak past. Pressing start will give you the full layout with each hexagon represented by letter, and an ally to tell you where to go by codec if you're unsure. But it doesn't indicate precisely in the structure where to go, and not all areas can be accessed immediately. If you get a new key card from someone or beat a boss, it will give you access to an item and or weapon somewhere in the facility to progress further. You can't help but add Metroidvania into the genre mix.
You like Castlevania, don't you?
The radar system works the same way the first MGS does, illustrating the enemy and camera fields of vision. At the beginning, you have different options. You can either have it operating all the time, set so you have to activate it by operating a computer node in a hexagonal structure which represents the options menu, or if you want a serious challenge, no radar system at all. I like this idea. It provides varying levels of challenge, because it's definitely harder without it.
True. That radar came in useful during VR training.
The items consist of unique visions, binoculars, gas mask, body armor, and boxes. Where's Raiden? So if you've already played the predecessors, you should know what to expect. You're all set once you get an M9. Guns are color-coded based on deadliness. They include a laser sight which is handy for manual aim, and bullets are affected by distance, like if you're close, hitting your target is instant, but if you're far away, it takes a second to hit your mark, so sometimes you have to shoot where the target is going to be. Now you know how most shooters have a fire button, right? Well, with the exception of heavy weapons, to shoot a handgun in Metal Gear Solid 2, whether or not you're in first person, holding the fire button will aim the gun and letting go of it will shoot. Pressing it repeatedly will fire several shots, and slowly releasing the button will disarm it. I don't know any other video game that does that.
Freeze!
You'll find yourself entering first person more often because guards can see further ahead as opposed to what the radar indicates, and the way they behave is affected by the surroundings including noise, temperature, and smell. Like if you try to knock on a wall in an operating warehouse, they won't hear it, but they can hear a metal surface being walked on. Jeez, the attention to detail is on the verge of psychotic. Other hazards include security cameras and laser triggered C4. It's all about making the best of your surroundings. Lockers are your best friend. You can store inactive enemies, hide in there yourself, and occasionally find ammo. but once you're spotted, you can sometimes shoot at a guard like nothing happened, but if they successfully call a strike team, that triggers the alert mode, jamming the radar system, and you need to stay hidden for a bit until they're called back. If you take down an enemy silently, sometimes they can still receive calls.
Why are you late with your status report? What's going on? Respond.
He'll call the cavalry to perform a vigorous search, so find a good locker. I find it odd that they never search inside these, at least when I played it. Just shoot the enemy radios. Yeah, you can do that too. The military advisor who assisted in the motion capture also taught how strike teams operate in groups, and it shows. They're fully armored, making it harder to take them down. They take cover themselves, shoot through windows, and flank you in numbers. They're definitely not stupid. Oh, and I didn't even mention the flying drones. The time it takes for the evasion meter to go down is longer than necessary, but this kind of AI combined with more refined control creates a lot of different ways to stay silent. There's almost no limit to what you can do. The camera is an overhead view with angles slightly changing depending on the room, but now that the analog stick is a more prominent use for movement, you can sneak past enemies and aim the gun with precision. Other new moves include hanging from railing and dodge jumping past gaps and into enemies. Even taking cover has been slightly altered. Movement can be controlled with the trigger buttons, and holding it next to a corner will let you see further ahead. The controls are still not designed for high-paced action. It can be a little clunky during boss battles, but otherwise, they're a huge improvement over the first MGS. Just being able to use the analog stick for movement alone makes it fun to this day. But it expects you to have played Metal Gear Solid and not just because of the story. When I played this for the first time, I got caught 3 times before going inside the ship. The controls are not like your typical third-person shooter, but after beating these 3, it became a smoother transition.
Okay, we'll skip that part.
According to Assistant Director Yoshikazu Matsuana, Kojima encouraged teamwork in the offices by handing out notebooks to every single member, and were tasked of brainstorming at least one idea daily. Kojima and Matsuana would read them during the evening to find any interesting ideas, and all the good ones were implemented into the gameplay. Examples include cooling spray to defuse bombs, and looking around corners with the trigger buttons.
Why won't you identify yourself?
There is no need for you to know.
I'll decide whether I need to know.
There aren't any moments where you have to take action outside the game, like looking at the back cover for a codec number or change the controller port, but Kojima still finds a way to make your brain pop out of your head.
Don't worry, it's a game. It's a game just like usual.
You'll ruin your eyes playing so close to the TV.
Most of them are triggered on command, like upsetting Rose to the point of not saving your progress, or Snake pulling a gun on you if you attack him. The story is mind-bending as it is anyway.
This is hilarious! This rules! But we can't use it.
If all you really wanted was unadulterated stealth gameplay, Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance has you covered, with 500 VR scenarios divided into 8 categories. And yes, you can play as Snake.
You know what you're doing.
There's even a mode where you can play 5 story-based missions at Big Shell as Snake, which I assume was a consolation for gamers complaining about Snake not being the main protagonist. And who would have thought there'd be a skateboarding minigame exclusive to the PS2, clearly capitalizing on the success of the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series. The 4th one was released a few months before Substance. This version was released for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PC between late 2002 and early 2003, but the one I'm currently using to review MGS2 is the HD collection on the PlayStation 3, Vita, and Xbox 360. The game runs in 720p, the cutscenes are full screen, and as you just saw, all the features from Substance are present here. Whatever version you get, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty is a masterpiece in every definition of the word. However, the story was too dumbfounding to get the same level of satisfaction I got from beating the first Metal Gear Solid, and Raiden as the main protagonist caused a lot of polarizing opinion at the time of release. With all that being said, the insane amount of effort and attention to detail put into the themes, graphics, level design, cinematic angles, and stealth gameplay cannot be denied, which unlike the first MGS have aged really well. I can't believe this came out in 2001. Along with other solid titles like Grand Theft Auto 3, Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy, and Gran Turismo 3, Metal Gear Solid 2 was the reason to buy a PlayStation 2 in 01 with around 7 million copies sold. Because it was the most commercially successful title in the series, and that Kojima raised even more questions, a sequel or prequel was inevitable. Hopefully the rest of the series will explain everything. As of this video, I haven't played them yet. Raiden and my confusion with the plot don't take away the fact that it's one of the best games I've ever played, and it's something you have to play at least twice, because you might not get it the first time.